Awesome. And welcome back into another installment of the 94 podcast. I'm Brooke Edel, the host, joined here with my guest, special guest in Tanner Hoops. Welcome to the 94 podcast, Tanner.
Brooke, thanks for having me on. Always great being with you.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, there's so much to get into. Jam-packed week of sports we just had with the NFL draft wrapping up over the weekend. You had the Minnesota Vikings picking at 18. Number one, Fernando Mendoza didn't attend the draft. Some speculation there, but there was headlines nonetheless. The second picked quarterback was Ty Simpson, that went number 13 to the Los Angeles Rams. That made headlines, especially with the Los Angeles Rams, who have Matthew Stafford, who won MVP for the NFL last season, closing out his career. So that is going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. Also, Mekhi Lemon was somebody that was dropping in the first round, but he got scooped up by the Philadelphia Eagles. Your reactions, Tanner, of the NFL draft. Those are just some notes that I got from the NFL draft for day one.
Well, I love the draft. This is America, and football is always going to dominate the headlines no matter what time of year it is. It felt like it was very underhyped coming into it. Usually you get the sense you're kind of counting down the weeks and the days when the draft is coming up, and that didn't feel to me to be the case this season. But once we got to draft day, I threw on the Kevin Costner movie as I do every year. I posted my photo of the top of Mel Kiper's head and the hairline and put that on there like I always do. And that's when it felt like draft day. And that's where we were locked in, Brooke. And, I think some of it probably went to, the aspect of Mendoza kind of being the assumptive number one, and he was, and well deserving so. And it's a cool story, in the sense that he did turn down that opportunity to go attend the draft live in Pittsburgh, stay home with his mom who's battling MS, and he's a wholesome guy. He's a really easy guy to root for, a very easy guy, I think, for a lot of people to look up to and see as a role model. I mean, he's a really just a great dude, a class act guy, and I couldn't be happier for him. I'm excited to see where his NFL career goes, and learning with Kirk Cousins, getting to share a locker room and a quarterback room with him. So I'm excited for him. And then to top it off, the LinkedIn commercial that they threw in there, I thought was just perfect. So I love that. We knew kind of who number one was going to be. Beyond that, I think is where the question marks came in. Ty Simpson was something I didn't see coming. I don't think a lot of people did. Of course, Stafford, coming off that MVP season, he is in the home stretch of his career. But what a better guy to learn under than a guy like that. Stafford's done it at a high level for a long time. You've got a great coach if you're a quarterback, or especially a young quarterback coming in. You're in the right system, tough division for sure, but it's a great franchise. They've been well run. They're relevant just about every year. So as good of a landing spot as you could really hope for Ty Simpson, albeit probably a little bit earlier than a lot of people were expecting. And then the Vikings, of course, I like the draft class as a whole. 18, I think, was another surprise for some folks with a guy like Caleb Banks, who's got all the upside there, like all the talent, the upside is there. But he played 3 games last season, and that's the issue, I think, with a lot of people. Now, Brooke, he's 327 pounds, but he's a lean 327. He moves really well for that size. But that being said, you're drafting a guy that big with a history of foot injuries. That doesn't always translate. So, yeah, it's a high
Awesome.
upside, but a high risk uh, draft pick for the Vikings.
Sure.
My only criticism really, and I went through, I clipped the tapes, the press conferences for all the guys they did bring in, and I really liked the draft class. I'd run through a wall for Chuck Demings. I think he might be the most positive person I've ever listened to. But you know what I didn't like about this is that it didn't feel like they addressed really where they needed to. It felt like they maybe didn't go after a few pieces that they really needed to shore up, because this roster looks like it's built to win now. Some questions, of course, and of course some uncertainty with the quarterback position last year. But the rest of the roster looks pretty good, minus a couple of things you want to shore up. And I don't think they went out and addressed those needs. I think they got, in large cases, the best player that was available. But could they have drafted for needs a little bit better? I think they could have. But I think that's going to come with not having a true general manager in place right now. Rob and Kevin, I think, kind of tag team that, but you don't have a guy who's going to be the established general manager as part of that. And yeah, I think there's going to be some confusion going into the draft process because of that.
Oh, most definitely. I think the Vikings did kind of, you said it earlier, they didn't really address their needs and they needed a center. And I was expecting a center and, either day two at the very least. I know day one it was going to be a toss up between whether Kenya and Sadiq was going to drop to them. He was selected at 16. Then at that point, I was like, all right, it's going to be defense. Either it's going to be Dylan Thieneman, who ended up with the Chicago Bears at 25. Um, and we get Caleb Banks, and I see defensive line Florida, and I'm like, all right, this guy's competitive again. Knowing that he did come back even after he had an injury-shortened season, so that's something that is kind of like maybe just like a light at the end of the tunnel, Tanner. But again, cautious with that. But just watching like the highlights of all these players, like Jake Golday, very quick to the ball. Doesn't get fooled on a lot of these reverse field situations. Really like what Dominique Orange really is with Iowa State as a defensive tackle. Really, getting the fans to really say like, hey, if we can't run the ball, they can't run the ball either. So just, and for all the Vikings fans that can remember the Williams Wall, it's kind of replacing that with Dominic Orange and bringing in Caleb Banks. I see offensive tackle with a Big Ten offensive tackle in Caleb Kirian. I don't know if have you seen him up close or.
Yeah, he's the guy that has the ability, I think, to play all three spots on the offensive line if needed. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center. And in his post draft presser, he did say that he's willing to do all those spots and just be one of those Swiss Army knife type of guys that can be in any position to help the team win. So you've got some flexibility there. Golday, I think, is in the same boat. He can play a few different spots. He could play either outside linebacker or edge, and potentially if inside if needed. So I think you've got some versatile guys, some guys that can play multiple positions and fill out multiple spots. But again, I think the biggest criticism, if there is one, I think they had a good draft. But I think if there is a criticism, it's going to be that you didn't get a true piece at some of the positions that you needed to shore up.
For sure, absolutely. I think that's noted for sure, Tanner. I think just looking at the overall draft class, you're hopeful to see these players really assimilate to the pro game. Jacoby Thomas, safety out of Miami, played a long season, so definitely really need to take it into account with a lot of these rookies hitting the rookie wall in their first season. Fun fact, though, Max Bretson, fullback of Michigan, had a special house roommate. He had J.J. McCarthy right next to him when he got drafted on day 3 with the Minnesota Vikings. How cool is that story?
Those were two of my favorite selections that they brought in. A guy like Thomas, he's a hard-hitting, blitz-heavy safety. He's going to fit right in with Brian Flores in that defensive scheme. So I'm really excited about him. And in his post-draft presser, he talked about I see a guy that they asked him, where does that aggression come from? And he said, I see somebody lined up opposite in a different colored jersey, and it's like they're taking food off my mother's table. So that's where that aggression comes from him. And I love that answer. And then Bredesen, he gets to reunite with McCarthy. And I like that they're, he's technically, I think, a tight end or was at Michigan. And now they're going to introduce him as a fullback. So, with the retirement of CJ Ham, that fits perfectly. I'm glad to see that the Vikings are rolling with that. They're going to keep that going because I love the role that CJ Ham played. I love CJ Ham. He's a likable and a great human being, but I love the role he played too. And I'm really excited to see a guy like Bredesen come in and carry that on. And you throw in the tie-in with McCarthy. Well, of course, it's only going to make him want to be better in pass pro, right?
Oh, absolutely right. You know that your guy's back there depending on you in key situations. You mentioned Chuck Demings. That's somebody that I think early on out of Stephen F. Austin, that's somebody that I think could be the steal of the draft so far for the Vikings. And you also got Damon Claiborne, running back out of Wake Forest. We'll see how he's able to kind of break through, especially with Xavier Scott being the third string. You got Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason kind of in a split chair. I know for a lot of fantasy football players, they want to see if they're going to be any kind of like breakthrough stud running back that's going to just surprise everybody, in the training camp. Do you see anything like that for Damon Claiborne in any of the film that you've been able to study?
Yeah, he's kind of buried in the depth chart as it is right now, but some of those day three draft guys end up being high value steals. So, he put together a really good tape, really good body of work when he was at Wake Forest. It's an ACC program that's kind of middle of the pack year in, year out, but his numbers were good enough. They spoke for themselves. And I'm excited to see what his camp looks like. He's obviously going to have to earn and claw and scrap and fight his way onto the roster, but I think there's a lot of upside to him, and it's absolutely a good value day three pick. And then I really like Demings in the sense that he's very positive. He's a great teammate. He's very grounded in his faith. I think he had the best quote from any of the guys that I listened to after the draft, and it was, he always wants to build others up. He wants to be a fountain and not a drain, and I really respect that from him. I know in the world of NIL, it's very tempting when somebody flashes a big check at you to go elsewhere, but he wanted to stay loyal to Stephen F. Austin, and that loyalty doesn't come around a whole heck of a lot. So he's a high character guy. He's a really talented individual, as we saw, and like the scouts told him, you look good in purple. So hopefully that translates to this fall.
Right, that's right. The final pick for the Vikings that we'll break down here, and then we'll move on to the next topic here, Tanner. Gavin, almost looks like Gerhardt, but it might be. Is it pronounced Gerhardt?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. So Gavin Gerhardt, center, Cincinnati. So they do get their center, the final pick, round 7. Is he a week 1 starter? Will we potentially see him week 1?
Not right now. I think he's got a big summer in front of him. That's not to say that he couldn't be, but a lot's got to go right, and hopefully that he can continue to put in the work and assimilate to the NFL game here quickly. And I think there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of value to him, but as of right now, he's probably not going to be the number 1 center in the old depth chart.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, it's a lot to ask to get plugged into a playoff ready roster and to be a week 1 starter. But still a lot to unpack here on the 94 podcast. I see you got your Gopher gear. I see some Frozen 4 gear for Minnesota hockey. But we do want to talk some more football before we shift to the ice. The Gophers, the Golden Gophers, had their spring game this past weekend. And Tanner, you were covering it. You were there.
It was a really cool experience getting back out to Huntington Bank Stadium. That's something we hadn't done with the spring game since 2021. And then we still had, social distancing restrictions coming out of the pandemic. So this was the first time we've had a true spring game. No restrictions, outdoors at Huntington Bank Stadium since 2017. That was PJ Fleck's first spring game here at the U of M. We hadn't had one in any sense in the last 2 years. The last time we had it was 2023 when it was indoors. So this kind of felt like a really true opportunity to showcase what we've had. And PJ has said that this has been his best spring in his 10 years now at Minnesota. You don't want to take a whole lot of conclusions from a spring game. I know it's tricky when you're doing those inter-squad things, but I think you got to feel pretty optimistic if you're a Gopher fan from what you saw on Saturday. Again, it's really hard to kind of navigate those things and evaluate what you saw. But I think you're really happy if you're a Golden Gopher fan or a coach or a player seeing what happened Saturday at Huntington Bank Stadium. Of course, we knew there were going to be some position battles, some questions, going into it, and I think we got a lot of those questions answered, Brooke. I really do. We knew going into it there were going to be some guys that are going to be week 1 starters regardless. Your incumbents and your guys that are going to be your leaders. We didn't need to see Anthony Smith play in that game. We don't need to see a guy like Maverick Baranowski play. Matt Kingsbury is the guy who had a really good spring. Those guys we all know are going to be day 1 starters for us. Drake Lindsay, he came in and did what we expected of him in limited action. We didn't want QB1 out there all that long. It's more about getting some answers below him on the depth chart, 2, 3, and 4. And we did run 4 quarterbacks out there, and they all looked really, really good. I think quarterback was something that maybe surprised Gopher fans at how deep we can potentially be this year. Drake is going to be the number one. But you look at the three guys that we put in after that between Chicken Merdinger, and Lansu, and all of them came in. They all led strong drives. Lansu has a heck of an arm and just looked fantastic. Chicken of course, a couple of years now behind either Drake or Ethan Kelly McManus. And all of them came in. They ran the offense really well, had a great sense of command with what they were doing. Had to make Greg Harbaugh a very happy offensive coordinator. The offensive line, of course, we knew Greg Johnson was not going to play. We knew there would be some pieces that we'd have to retool there, but we also feel like that can be a strength for us this season. Wide receiver, I think, was a group that probably surprised some people at how well some of those guys came in and performed. We returned two studs from last year, and Jalen Smith, who was the hero in the bowl game, and then uh, Javon Tracy, who I believe led us in touchdown catches last season. We know that those two are probably going to be the top two targets this year, but we go out and get a guy like Perry Washington, who had a really good spring game. Hayden Moore, a true freshman, that's going to be an absolute legend here at Minnesota if he sticks and stays with us. He really burst onto the scene. Looks like he'll be a great deep threat. And a guy like Zion Steptoe, I think, with a lot of uncertainty at the wide receiver position coming into it, he was probably consensus number two in the depth chart, ends up being one of the MVPs of the spring game. So, we feel good about the receiver group we've got out there. Tight ends, of course, is going to be a different look for us. We went out and got the Helms kid from Oklahoma. Pierce Walsh is back for us. So, we're still, I think, juggling some guys in that spot. But on the offensive side of the ball, Brock, I think you're really happy if you're a Golden Gopher fan with what you saw and feel like we're going to have some depth there this season.
Okay, no, absolutely. Really excited to see, the Gophers get back out there. So there was a lot that you learned in that spring game. It's a ways away from September 3rd in the first game against Eastern Illinois. But from now until then, do you expect any like splashes of like NIL? Because I know like PJ Fleck said like, hey, we're going to be recruiting nationwide. We're going to make this a national like program.
Yeah, the expectation is always to continue to raise the bar here at Minnesota, especially in this conference, where if you're not consistently getting better and raising the bar and putting yourself on a national platform more and more, then you're going to get left behind. That's just where the Big Ten is right now. The Big Ten is the pinnacle of college football. It's going to be that way again this season. So we got to continue to elevate and see what we can do, where we can shore up some pieces. I do think we got some answers as far as position battles, and I still think there are going to be some that are going to be decided in those first 3 weeks of camp when the guys arrive on campus. Late in the summer. Defensively, I think defensive line is going to be a big strength for us this season. We've got a few different guys that rotated in, and all of them were exceptional. And now it's going to be about how do we get all those guys on the field? How do we get them all consistent playing time? We know defensive line should be a strength for us, but what's the combination going to look like? Linebacker, I think something similar with that. And then the secondary, John Nestor, a ball hawk coming back for us this season. That's huge. Kerry Brown is a guy that we're really excited to have back. So even with the departure of Coy Parrish, a secondary is going to be a strength for us this season. We saw a couple of ball hawks in the spring game. I like the Knutson kid a lot. He was a highly coveted Division II guy from Southwest Minnesota State. We really had to scrap and claw to keep him in state, and thankfully we did, and he showed out in his first go for spring game. So those are some of the questions I think is not going to be how good are we going to be at those positions, but what's going to be the right combination. How do Greg Harbaugh and Danny Collins use them on their respective sides of the ball, and even on the special team side of things, Brooke, I think there's a little bit of a position battle there. We're going to go on our third starting kicker here in 3 years. It's good to see Dragon Gesic was at the game the other day. Kind of in there, helping coach.
Sure.
But and I like what we saw from both kickers. Daniel Jackson was the only one who got the opportunity to kick a field goal. He made it a 52-yarder, so it was good to see a local guy, and of course, familiar name. We had a Daniel Jackson go through the program a couple of years ago. It was really good, and
Yeah.
we hope this one's going to be really good too. So
Yeah.
we feel really good about where we're at. We think we've done everything that we can or have wanted to do during the spring, and now it's about staying focused, staying sharp, staying healthy, and getting ready to hit the ground running when everyone gets back here in the fall.
I hear that. No, it's the three phases of the game. You got your offense, got your defense, and also the kicking game. And I think that's where the shifts can happen, especially in a tough conference in the Big Ten, where you can have one of those game-breaking plays that can happen. Once you're able to get those game breakers out on the field. I mean, you saw that with Indiana, the way that they're able to shift a lot of their games. Before they were a household program, they were doing the kickoff returns. They were doing the punt returns. They were getting the scoop and scores. So it takes the entire the entire I would say the entire program to really buy in. And I feel like PJ Fleck has done a really good job. 10 years in, time has flown. Like I just remember when he first took over, and I was excited because I knew that he was coming over from Western Michigan, and he had a lot of success there. And once he was in the Big Ten, we knew that we had somebody that was going to be here for the long haul, because there was been you've seen it, Tanner, in regards to Gopher football, where there hasn't been that consistency with the coaching staff. So it's nice to see a coach getting into their 10th year. It's pretty special.
I love what DJ's done here for the program. It doesn't seem all that long ago. I remember the day that he was hired. I wasn't living here and I wasn't with the network at the time, but I was in the city, and I remember seeing that helicopter fly overhead, and I had this thought, I wonder if that's Coach. I wonder if that's him, coming into town right now. But he's come in and given the program stability. Of course, he's raised the bar here, and we've achieved levels of success that the program literally hasn't in 60 years. But he's brought in consistency and he's brought in identity. Gopher football was something that really didn't have its own identity for a long time. You look at the hockey program, Pride on Ice. That's the motto, the mantra, and they have an identity there. They have an established culture, and Coach Fleck brought that on the football side of things too. So he's done a tremendous job. I think he's going to be a Gopher for life. I think he loves being here. I don't, he gets brought up in other schools, coaching searches, what have you. But I think he loves the Twin Cities here. He loves the state. And he loves his program, and he's really proud of what he's built here. And I don't see him stepping away from that anytime soon.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I've heard his name get brought up for the Michigan job. When the Michigan job was we see when that was available. There's been numerous other coaching jobs that have come out. USC was one of the ones that another Big Ten coaching job that did come up recently. But it's good to see that he's staying pat with the program, and he's nurturing the program, and he's got RTV, row the boat, and that's the mantra for our the Gopher football program, and it's nice to see that is back. Especially with the historic Rose Bowls, for the Gophers back in the 60s. And I know that they're trying to get back to another Rose Bowl. Do you expect, I know that I'm not saying that they're expecting a Rose Bowl this year, but do you expect a Rose Bowl in the next 5 years?
Coach, his message to the guys about a year ago was be delusional. Nobody saw Indiana achieving the level of success that they have here the last couple of years, but you put in the right pieces and the right people, and anything can happen here in college football. College football can be so unpredictable, as much as we try to get it down to a fine art. Coach doesn't want to put limits on anything. We can achieve and go as far as we want to, but it takes that work. It takes those bricks being laid to get us in the position to do that.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears. We talk a lot of Gopher football. We'll talk about Gopher football in the future for sure, Tanner. I can definitely feel the passion that you have for the program, so that's awesome. All right, NHL playoffs. I'm wearing some Wild gear. We got a big game. Was it Game 5 coming up? It's in Dallas. You were at one of the Wild games, if I'm not mistaken. Were you at one of the Wild games during the series?
I was at game three when they went to double overtime, and I took a photo of the arena scoreboard. It was like 12:54 when we got out of there. Got home at 1:30. Stayed for the whole thing. It was so much fun. I love the Stanley Cup playoffs. I love when the Wild are in it and they're competing the way they are. And this year feels a little bit different. The Wild famously haven't won a playoff series since 2015, but this year doesn't just feel like they can win the series. It feels like they're a legit contender to make a run. So it's hockey time in Minnesota. Hockey in Minnesota is all the time, but this time of year when the Wild are really playing well, they're playing meaningful hockey, and that's putting it mildly. This is a special time of year.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was good to see them bounce back, and get game four, to ship it back out to Dallas, to set up this pivotal game five. Volstead has just been standing on his head, throughout the series. It's just been obviously that went overtime as well on this past Saturday. What do you expect out of Volstead, and also like the top guns like Kirill Kaprizov, Brock Faber, and you also are looking at Matt Boldy. What are you expecting Quinn Hughes to really, what are they able to muster up to really push the Wild over that hump and really, shake that 800-pound gorilla off their back?
Yeah, let's start with Wallstead. He's a guy that had, I don't think, a whole lot of high expectations coming into these playoffs, and maybe externally there weren't a lot on him. And he's done his job. He's come in there and given the Wild an opportunity to win. Largely was the number two to Gus for most of the season. But of course, Gus was faltering down the stretch, and Coach Hines made that move after the regular season ended. And it's turned out to be the right one. So Wally's given us a chance to win night in and night out, which has been fantastic to see. Defensively, you've got the best two-man blue line in the NHL between Hughes and Faber. And they're going to go out there and they're going to skate almost 30 minutes a night, it seems like, and they're going to give you a chance to win and do their things. You get to the top of the forward units. Kaprizov, of course, he did his thing in game one. He's got to be the true 97. He's got to be the game one version of himself that he just has not been largely for games 2, 3, and 4. You know what you're getting from guys like Hartman and Boldy, and those guys are the complimentary straws that stir the drink. Having Matt Zuccarello back on the power play is going to be huge. I don't know, Brooke, that I've ever seen one team rely on someone like one player for the power play as much as the Wild have on Matt Zuccarello, but thankfully it looks like he's coming back, and we do expect him to play in Game 5, and I think that's going to pay big dividends because they're a different team without him. So having Zook back in there is going to be big, and beyond that, this series is going to come down to beyond the big guns on both sides. Who is it going to be that's going to step up and make those plays? Who are going to be the third, fourth line guys to do it? I love Michael McCarron. I think he's come out there and given the Wild some really nice shifts, gone out there and done some really cool things, scored, in game 3. And, that fourth line's going out there and they played well. I think that's what it's going to come down to, because on the other side, Dallas, of course, is their studs between Robertson and Johnston, and even Jamie Benn still got something left in the tank, Duchesne and Rantanen. You know what you're going to get from those guys. But, when you get down to it, those third, fourth lines, who's going to step up and make the play and avoid making the big mistake?
Absolutely, yeah. That's playoff hockey. Just being able to avoid the big mistake, and having every shift, give you that opportunity to capitalize on any mistake. Given just watching, overtime hockey last night between Utah and Las Vegas, the goalie drops his stick, and in my mind, I'm thinking like, why is his teammate not like grabbing it real quick, or because it was a scramble. It was a mad scramble, and long story short, Las Vegas wins. With they basically had an empty net because the goalie was scrambling and they shoot it back to the net. Las Vegas Knights, they win in overtime, but in those moments where you just need your guys to lay it out on the line, shot block. Like I think that is an interesting stat to really study for the NHL playoffs, is block shots. I think those block shots definitely lead to those teams that do end up advancing further, because what is more deflating than like you're seeing an open net and then somebody is diving onto the ice and blocking a shot. They're sacrificing their entire body in that case. But looking at what the Dallas Stars and their high octane offense, especially with you mentioned Robertson, Ratnan, Duchesne, Jamie Benn. And also, who's their goalie? If you could, who's the goalie for? I think it's Jay.
Jake Ottinger.
Jake Ottinger, yeah. And he's just making these Venza worthy saves against the Minnesota Wild. Do you see this going seven? Yeah, well, go on.
Yeah, I'd kind of be surprised if it doesn't, especially now that Minnesota's getting back to full strength. And Ottinger, of course, being a local guy, being a Lakeville North graduate, that's just one of those storylines that ties into it, makes this even more special. But I'd be surprised if this one doesn't go seven. I think going into the playoffs, we knew this was going to be the best first round series. Although I think a few of them are kind of surprising. We had two sweeps. The top two teams in their respective conferences both swept. But beyond that, everything looks like it's potentially going to go the distance. We're going to get some 6, 7 game series, and it's really cool to see. This is playoff hockey at its finest. So yeah, I'd be surprised if this one doesn't go seven, and I think a lot of fans would probably be okay with that. Even a Wild fan, if it means you got to go down to Dallas and win a game seven. If you're a fan of this great sport, you got to love a situation like that.
They call it seventh heaven for a reason. It's game seven. Okay, so yeah, we'll move forward. Other games that are going on tonight. Bruins Sabres. That series is going Buffalo's way right now, 3-1. The Buffalo Sabres fans, I feel like they're having the most fun in these playoffs.
100%. They've been waiting for this for a long time, and what a feel-good story it is, Brooke. I mean, I'm kind of sneaky on the Buffalo bandwagon here, just because it's been so long for them, and they've
Right.
been waiting for a team like this, and all of a sudden, Lindy Ruff, who's been doing this at a few different places for a long time, has this city believing again. They've got some fantastic pieces in there, and it's I think partially a lackluster effort on Boston's part, but Buffalo looks like they're meant for the moment. And they look like they're going to be a legitimate cup contender. So I'm happy for those guys. It's one of the cool stories that we get coming out of here. I grew up a Penguins fan. I, of course, kind of adopted the Wild since coming up here. So that would be my ideal Stanley Cup series, Stanley Cup final series, Wild in Pittsburgh. But, could you imagine if Buffalo was able to sneak through and find a way to compete for a Stanley Cup? I think some of the major TV markets and outlets would probably hate having a market like that in there, but what a great story that would be for a franchise in a city like that.
Oh, no, no question. Tanner, I think that's a great story to follow with the Buffalo Sabres and the entire fandom that follows the Sabres. Real quick, Ducks, Oilers, and this has been a series of surprises, and the Anaheim Ducks have been a surprise so far. They have the lead 3-1 in this series. Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers on the brink of elimination. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk?
I'd like to say that Connor McDavid would not have thought that, but he's got to be at the point where I think some frustration's got to be setting in. Anaheim is another team that's been down for a number of years. Of course, they've won a cup, in both of our lifetime. But back in '07, they had one with some future Hall of Famers. But they go out and they get a guy like Joe Quenneville, a guy who's got, of course, a troubled past off the ice, but he's a proven winner, as a Stanley Cup champion coach. And, he's brought Anaheim back to relevancy in the hockey world. And they have the Oilers on the ropes. And it looks like, they're putting potentially the best player in the game on the brink of elimination. And McDavid came within, a couple of games over the last 2 seasons of winning the Stanley Cup, and that's really the only thing missing from his legacy. A lot of people consider him to be the best in the NHL right now. I think, of course, there's some debate on that, but you look at the teams they put together here the last couple of years and the complementary pieces that he's had between guys like Nugent Hopkins and Draisaitl, and it seemed like their goaltending let him down. Well, that's not the excuse anymore. Stuart Skinner's with Pittsburgh, but they don't seem to have that depth that they've had the last couple of years. And, I think some frustration's got to be setting in there for McDavid, a guy who, burst onto the scene from day one. You knew he was going to be a superstar and a guy who could change a franchise. And, as you get older and older and those opportunities start to become fewer and fewer, you might look at, potential other landing spots for you. And you got to ask yourself, if it hasn't happened here in Edmonton, is it going to, or do I need to start looking elsewhere?
That's a great question to really ask, going into the off season, especially if the Oilers don't get back and if they don't, hoist the cup this season. Canadians, Lightning, real quick, lightning round here with these matchups. Canadians, Lightning, I think we're headed for Game 7 in this series as well. There's a lot of overtime hockey, and we mentioned the Oilers. They've been playing a lot of hockey. Tampa Bay has been playing a lot of hockey over the last couple of seasons. Montreal Canadiens, Tampa Bay Lightning, Game 5. That's tomorrow, so these are tomorrow's games. And then we got your Pittsburgh Penguins, Tanner, taking on the Philadelphia Flyers. And the Penguins are looking to come back from 3-0.
Yeah, I'll try to be concise with these here. I think Montreal's actually outplayed Tampa here, and looked like they could steal this series, and they still could. But on the Tampa side of things, I think you got to feel like we haven't played very well these first 4 games, but we've played well at the right times. We've done enough. Brandon Hagel looks like the next coming at Gretzky here these first 4 games. He has been outstanding. So Montreal, I feel like maybe they've given Tampa their best punch, and yet it's still tied after 4 games. I think that's where you feel optimistic if you're Tampa, knowing that you're still going to have at minimum 2 chances to win on home ice and in advance. Pittsburgh, of course, didn't look great early on. They were missing some, I think, from some of their top guns early on. Crosby, though, he's really tough to close out. The stat I saw last night, he's got 21 career points in 24 career elimination games. That's a guy that just refuses to lose, one of the all-time greats. In this game. And Pittsburgh, it's a first-year head coach there. It's a new staff, and I think there's a learning curve that goes with it. They're going to have home ice advantage as far as a Game 7 if they can find a way to win in Philadelphia. So that series is far from over, and maybe it's the bias in me, but I still feel pretty good if you're a Penguins fan. Going into Game 6 at Philly.
For sure, absolutely. We did mention Utah, so Mammoth, Golden Knight, they pick it up again for Game 5, series tied 2-2. Again, just coming off that overtime game in Utah at the Delta Center. They shift gears over to T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Las Vegas has, just been that consistent veteran team in these NHL playoffs where you just know where a lot of these youth-driven teams that they're playing in the first round, they're going to have fits when they play the Golden Knights.
Yeah, this is a fun little developing rivalry here. They're neighboring states,
Sure.
not far from each other, Salt Lake City and Vegas, so you get the opportunity for fans to go to and from. And, I did stay up for that overtime last night and watched that. I was, turned away from the Timberwolves when that one got out of hand and ended up watching a little bit of hockey. And, Vegas just looked like the better team during that overtime. Utah had a chance on home ice to go up 3-1. I won't say they got dominated in overtime, but I thought Vegas clearly was the better team. And now the pressure shifts back onto the Mammoth. Now they've got to go on the road potentially twice to close out this Vegas team, a team that isn't that far removed from a Stanley Cup. They won it back in 23. So yeah,
Yep.
it's going to be an uphill climb for the Mammoth. But a fun story in their right too. Coming over from Arizona and. That was a franchise that had been down for a number of years, and it's good to see. A new team is in there. With some superstars, Logan Cooley, of course, former Gopher, easy to root for.
Yep.
So that's going to be a fun series that very well could go 7 as well.
Absolutely. That's a perfect transition to the next topic. You were talking about the Timberwolves. They did play last night. They did lose to the Denver Nuggets. I believe it was 125-113, 12-point loss. You obviously without your superstar in Anthony Edwards, but you also lost a starter that played all 82 games in Dante DiVincenzo. How can the Minnesota Timberwolves bounce back from an emotional win in Game 4, but then you lose Game 5 in a quick turnaround, and then now you get Game 6 coming up on Thursday?
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought that this series was going to be decided in 5 games, one way or another. I think even without the injuries, if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, is the Denver Minnesota series going to be decided in 5 with everybody healthy and at full strength? Nobody would have thought that. So, last night, of course, would have been great. Would have been great to go to Denver shorthanded and close it out. Denver, to their credit, you knew they were going to play better. You knew they were going to punch back. Having the home crowd behind them, I don't think a whole lot of people thought, as nice as it would have been to play with house money and close out the series, I don't think many people were surprised at the outcome. That being said, I think you're still optimistic if you're a Wolves fan. Anthony Edwards, of course, missing him is huge. That's not a guy that you can replace. And Dante DiVincenzo, I mean, what a brutal loss. He's a guy that's really fun to watch on both ends of the floor, does a ton for the team, and like you said, didn't miss a game during the regular season. Just brutal to have something like that happen to him. And then everybody held their breath last night when Nas went down, because that's a guy
Yeah.
that you cannot afford to lose if you're Chris Finch. You're starting to see this team's depth really come into play. Where what a luxury it is when you can go to the bench and bring in guys like Io and Bones Highland, and you can get that instant energy off the bench. And through the first 4 games of the series, Rudy Gobert had been the best player in the series on either side. He just completely locked down Jokic. And Minnesota's a team that's kind of built for this time of year, where we get the ball out to the wings. We can space the floor really well. High octane, high powered offense. You can defend differently in the playoffs. They let you defend differently in the playoffs than in the regular
Right.
season. This team protects the rim really well. So yeah, it's gonna be tough to try and close out a team like this shorthanded, but absolutely within the realm of possibility. But I tell you what, Game 6 is going to matter a whole lot more than Game 5, because if you can close them out on your home floor, get that little extra time for Ant to rest and hopefully come back at full strength, it's going to make the series look a whole lot different than whether Denver wins it and you got to go there and win Game 7 shorthanded. Then the momentum clearly shifts back to them, and then you might have a problem. But it's going to be about those bench guys. Can they come in? Can they continue to give you quality minutes off the bench?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, losing Dante DiVincenzo for the season, he was having a great series. Before that injury, that was 1 minute into Game 4. And you looked at what Io DeSumo was able to do, have a career night, 43 points, and no one saw that coming. Even his teammates, Julius Randle, was just like, I didn't even know that he was this good. Like, when you got your teammates being that candid and just being open, like, that just lets you know, like, all right, these guys are, like, they're really, bought into Chris Finch and the program here with the Minnesota Timberwolves, looking to get back into the second round. The pressure does shift back to Minnesota, because Game 7 without Anthony Edwards is not very favorable back in Denver. So knowing that it is a 1-game series, you got to take care of business in Game 6. I expect more out of the bench, because I feel like the bench is going to have a better game. A lot of turnovers in this last game. Almost like 25 turnovers. You're not going to win a playoff game on the road against a 3-time MVP in Jamal Murray, both healthy on the court for the Nuggets. So the Nuggets, they did have almost like a meltdown of sorts, and where it got to 10 points. That was as close as it got, though. And it will be definitely interesting to see how the bench plays, but one guy that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to is Terrence Shannon Jr., Big Ten alum out of Illinois, and I think he's definitely getting his shot back, and he definitely is one player that I think could be an X factor the rest of the playoffs. I know that he didn't get that many minutes during the regular season, but that could be by design. For the fact that there is injuries now he's getting those opportunities. And also, I don't know if you watch a little bit the end. There was a little bit of a troll by Nikola Jokic where he's handed the ball back to Joan Berringer, but he's a rookie, so he's like, all right, I'm just gonna grab the ball, and then he grabs it back and he forces like the jump ball. Like, all right, this is high IQ basketball. Like, okay. You got to look out for he's named the Joker for a reason. So, but again, I think this is going to be fun. Regardless, going back to Game 6, it's just always a captivating game. Denver, Minnesota, and I know I said games. I said Wolves in 7. That was when I thought Anthony Edwards was going to play all 7. But I think it has to end on Thursday for the Wolves to really have a shot to advance. But let's take a look at the other games. Have you been paying attention to the Rockets Lakers playoff series? LeBron
Yeah,
James.
that was kind of a weird, unexpected start to the series, right? Like, I don't know that a whole lot of people saw LA taking the first three and then not showing up for game four. I don't think anyone thought it would be a sweep, but LA
No.
just really looked pedestrian that night. And you can't do that against a team like Houston's. Too many weapons, too many dangerous guys on that team where do they have the capability to come back and win it in 7? They do. It's not likely, but they absolutely are a dangerous team, and you cannot let up. You can't take your foot off the gas if you're LA.
Oh, absolutely. You can't take your foot off the gas. Definitely have to close out the Houston Rockets. It looks like it's going to be a gentleman's sweep. They get him back one more time in LA, knowing that Luka is on the mend. Austin Reeves is also recovering. Lakers are licking their wounds, but knowing that, hey, if we can get this series done with, we can get more rehab, and we can also rest LeBron, and knowing how important that is to make sure that you can save LeBron for the final, if you can get to a finals. Magic Pistons, that game was going on last night. I was watching a little bit of it. Jalen Suggs and the Orlando Magic are up 3-1, commanding lead. So a local kid from Minnehaha Academy doing it big with the Orlando Magic. The Detroit Pistons in danger as the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, possibly being dribbled out in the first round.
Yeah, I don't know if a whole lot of people saw that one coming, but I don't know that a whole lot of people are surprised either because Detroit, as talented as they are, don't have a lot of guys who've been in this situation before. Detroit doesn't have a great postseason pedigree. It's been a long time since they were, about 20 years or so when their lineup looked like Wallace, Stackhouse, those guys. Since they were this good and they were a true contender. I think there's a learning curve that goes in with it. And I think we're seeing a resurgence from a guy like Paolo, who didn't look good in the play-in tournament. And all of a sudden he's, turned into the guy that I think a lot of people thought he would coming out of Duke. Detroit's got some of the best players in the league for sure, but they need a little more consistency from a guy like Durant, and Cade Cunningham's going to do his thing. Series is far from over. Detroit absolutely has the capability to make this one go 7, but you got to give a ton of credit to the Magic, a team coming out of the play-in tournament, and they're getting the best out of their guys at the right time.
Most certainly, most certainly. That moves us to the Raptors Cavaliers, and we'll wrap up here in the NBA coverage. Raptors Cavaliers in a tightly contested series, going back to Cleveland for Game 5. Series tied 2-2. Raptors getting some help from Jamison Battle, former Golden Gopher, and it's they're showing up everywhere. These Gophers.
Yeah, JMO looked really darn good. A couple of nights ago, he had that stretch. It might have been game 3 or something like that. He was absolutely lethal in the fourth quarter, and they do their post game chain in their locker room. He got it, so it was awesome to see. I know maybe there's some frayed relations there. Some people didn't like the way that his Gopher career ended. I'm always going to be a JMO fan. I always had good interactions with him, both inside and outside basketball. So I'm always rooting for him, and I'm happy to see that he's found something there in Toronto. That series is going 7. I'm just saying it now. I mean, they've played so back and forth. It's been such fun basketball to watch, and it's everything you could want in that type of matchup. So one way or another, that one's going the distance.
Sure. More basketball in that series to come. Spurs, Trailblazers. This has been a drama-filled series for a first round. You got Victor Wembanyama that went out with a concussion, missed a game. They questioned the NBA's protocol. They were expecting him back for Friday. He was in the building in street clothes, but he did show back up over the weekend, and they were able to take care of business and get that 3-1 lead. And they're going back to Portland. But Portland's a scrappy team, just a scrappy team, and I think with what Tiago Splitter, former San Antonio Spurs, so he knows the culture. It'll be interesting to see how Victor Wembanyama is able to perform in his first ever closeout game coming up on Thursday, and then Knicks and Hawks. This is one that I think is going to go 7 as well. 2-2. Nikhil Alexander-Walker with the Atlanta Hawks, somebody that I'm rooting for, just being a former Timberwolf, but also rooting for Karl Anthony Towns. So again, it's a battle between two former Timberwolves. But again, Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, they're just fun basketball to watch. All these guys play. What's your thoughts on that series? I know Celtics 76ers probably on the verge of wrapping up as well.
Yeah, Tatum and Brown have been everything that Boston could hope for, and Philly just doesn't have the answers there. So I credit them. They did take Game 2. They avoided the sweep, but yeah, that one looks like they've got Philly on the ropes, and Boston should move on. And Boston arguably is the favorite to come out of the East right now. Atlanta, New York, I'm with you. I think that one's going 7. I think on paper the Knicks probably should do it in 6, but Atlanta's a gritty, scrappy team, and they've really done a good job hanging in there and finding ways to be lethal. So give them a ton of credit. I think that's another one going the distance. That Spurs and Blazers series, even without Wemby, you still feel pretty good if you're a San Antonio fan. It hasn't been the cakewalk they thought it would be, and I think you give a lot of credit because I think you said the right word about Portland is they're scrappy. They're a scrappy group, and Tiago Splitter was part of that, Popovich era, and he gets it. He knows what the standard is and what the pedigree is to win at this time of year. So, he's got his team in there. They just don't have the guns that San Antonio does. And but I think you give them a lot of credit. I think it's something to feel good about if you're a Portland fan going forward. But this one should end here in the next game, if not 2. This one doesn't go 7, but having Wemby back should be enough to put San Antonio in the driver's seat. But I like what you said, that it's his first closeout game in his NBA career, and that can tell you a lot about a player and his legacy.
Most certainly. Most certainly. Yeah, we'll definitely stay tuned with both the NBA and NHL playoffs. But I want to also, let the audience know a little bit about you, Tanner, before, we bid adieu here on the 94 podcast. Just want to have you talk a little bit about your sports career, and also, just for any of the youth out there, to, also just, let them know your story, how you got started, being the voice for not only the University of Minnesota athletics, Gophers volleyball play-by-play, Gophers football, Gophers hockey, also in studio with Learfield and Canaries baseball. So I'll let you tee it off.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I knew this was an avenue that I wanted to pursue for a long time. Growing up, had a love and a passion for sports and wanted to find a way to follow that. I knew it wasn't going to be on the field, court, ice, whatever it may be. It wasn't going to be as an athlete due to a diagnosis of Marfan syndrome when I was 4 years old, and that's something that ties in, kind of comes full circle to where I am now. Because at the time, this was 1999. At the time I was diagnosed, Marfan syndrome was not relatively well known, and it still isn't. We're starting to learn, more and more about it and get the word out there. But the U of M was one of the only places in the country that had a research facility that was dedicated to it. So, I grew up about 4 hours southwest of here in northwestern Iowa, and that was one of the closer hubs that I could get to. So I've known the doctors and the cardiologist up here at the U of M quite literally since I can remember. And they've taken great care of me. I still see, a lot of those original doctors here 20 plus years later. And, they've been a part of my childhood and upbringing for, forever. So getting the opportunity to come here and join the Gopher Sports Network and have opportunities with Learfield and Big Ten Plus and things like that back in 2021 just kind of made it a full circle moment. So, it's something where I got to stay involved. I get to be with a school that's done so much for me, a university, and that really has added to my quality of life. I love this city and this state, and it's an honor to be able to get to represent them. I've had plenty of people who are willing to help me get there. Brooke, like anything, you don't get to be where you are without people who recognize that they were in your shoes once and somebody helped them and they want to pay it forward and pass it on. So I have so many people to be grateful for in that sense. My family couldn't have been more supportive. I couldn't have been more blessed with a family that was going to be behind me every step of the way. All the mentors and the people that have been willing to invest in me, my Lord and Savior, he's done so much for me. I mean, literally we coming out of this Easter season, literally took on the wrath of God just to save me and because he loves me and have a relationship with me. And then he throws in things like this and a career path that I love just because he can. I can't thank him enough for that, and never will stop. But I'm just really grateful for how things ended up. And then you throw in the Sioux Falls Canaries too, where we've got a Minnesota-based ownership group there that it all kind of tied into the same ecosystem. I'm really grateful that everybody is willing to make that work, so I can spend my summers in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, working in the American Association, and I'm getting ready to make that move here, Brooke. Head down there on Sunday for the summer and
Okay.
get ready for baseball season. So there's so many people that have really gone out for me and put me in a spot to succeed, and so many people that I'm grateful are in my life, and it's a full circle moment certainly coming here, and I'm excited to see where this path continues to take me.
That's awesome. No, thank you for sharing a little bit about your story, Tanner. That's definitely inspirational. For everyone here on the 94 podcast, Tanner, you're a very easy guy to root for. Just want to say that out loud to you. Really humbled to have you join the 94 podcast. It would be great to have you back for more episodes and, just continue to chit chat and, hear more about, your interactions with the Gopher Athletics. And, I'm looking forward to also being on the sideline and covering the Gophers alongside with you.
Absolutely. Hey, always great talking with you. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, looking forward to seeing where your career takes you as well.
Appreciate that. Until next time here in the 94 podcast, we'll see you guys at the TOP. And we're out. Thanks, Tanner.